Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy.
Jack Smith, in my opinion, is a criminal. And I noticed his interviewer was, I think that was Weissman. And I hope they're going to look into Weissman, too. Weissman's a bad guy. And he had somebody in Lisa, who was his puppet, worked in the office really as the top person. And I think that she should be looked at very strongly. I hope they're looking at Shifty Schiff. I hope they're looking at all these people. And I'm allowed to find out. I'm allowed to, I'm, in theory, the chief law enforcement officer. But I have a very good, talented group.
All right, that was Donald Trump. We're going to get to that and other things in a second. I'm excited for today's guest. She is national security and homeland security expert, Juliette Kayyem. We shall chat with her in just a moment. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. I love how he says in theory, not according to the Constitution or law, but in theory. And, it's my theory, and therefore it's legal, and it is what it is. There's so much wrong there. I mean, he's sitting when he said those things, he was sitting with Attorney General Pam Bondi, with FBI Director Kash Patel, but he's literally telling them, here are my enemies. I hate them. Go after them. Do you think he thinks about, I hate them so much, but you know what? When they get to court, they'll have a defense of vindictive and selective prosecution, and they'll get out, and I don't really care. Or is he just dumb? It's like, if he just didn't say all those things, the people he's targeting have a much greater chance of either going through a full trial or maybe even getting convicted and going to prison.
The answer is no, he was wronged. They should be punished. How dare they insult, go after him for the things that he actually did and said? I mean, right? It's just...
Yeah, and, he mentioned Andrew Weissman. We had a very timely interview this week with Andrew, who's been on this podcast several times. I believe it was the day after the news broke about his exclusive interview with former special counsel Jack Smith, also mentioned in that clip by Trump. He's not the top law enforcement officer in the country. That's actually the Attorney General. And there's supposed to be a measurable degree of independence between the executive branch, the president, the White House, and the Department of Justice. But of course, that's not happening here.
Well, since the Attorney General is Pam Bondi, I'm not really sure.
Those lips. Have you seen those lips?
There's,
Who did he talk about this week? He was doing some...
His press secretary.
No, it was somebody else. And he's like, it was a reporter. He's like, I'm not taking a question from her, but I do like looking at her.
Oh, yes, he did do that, yes.
What the fuck?
1950s, baby. It's back in style.
Could you imagine anybody else doing that? I don't want to answer that question. But man, she's got a nice chest.
Well,
Who was that? That was Obama. Or, I don't know. I don't want to talk to you. But wow, what a body. Joe Biden. Can you imagine if Joe Biden said something like that?
Well, the way this party works is if you're white, anything you say is a youthful indiscretion.
Well, like those Republicans that had all that I love Nazis and black people are watermelon
Yeah, they're
people.
30 years old, but they're,
It could be to your point, like if the Republicans are so awful that if a video surfaced or a text surfaced with 90-year-olds in a nursing home, like J.D. Vance would probably be like, it's just a bunch of kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a bunch of kids fooling around.
If you're black and you're 14, you're an adult.
Yeah. So speaking of Trump's weaponization of the Department of Justice, there was another indictment that came down yesterday, this time against former National Security Advisor and UN Ambassador John Bolton, no friend of Donald Trump. Those two are arch enemies. They've said so many horrible things about each other over the years. But interestingly, this case seems to have a lot of legs. According to all the legal experts, it was a long investigation. The indictment is about 28 pages. There are, I think, 30 plus charges that could send him to prison for 180 years, which would be a very long time since he's about 75 now.
Youth.
I wonder what it's like to be in jail when you're 250. Do you have like some kind of status, like senior status? Like, yeah, leave that dude alone. He's 200.
Silver status.
Yeah, like silver status. Like, is there like a 200 plus club in like Sing Sing or something? So he could be in trouble. However, the experts are also saying that the vindictive/selective prosecution defense could apply here, even though he may have done some things, because that defense, it's almost like it doesn't matter what the underlying crimes were. Because that's the whole point of the defense. It's like, yeah, a lot of people commit crimes, but when you telegraph for weeks and literally tell your Department of Justice to go after person A and nobody else, it's kind of irrelevant what the crime is. You're choosing who to prosecute, you're weaponizing the government, you're using and abusing the power of the U.S. legal system and Department of Justice to go after your enemies. That could be a very credible defense.
Yeah, that's exactly what people are saying. It also obviously looks like, maybe he had some materials that were possibly classified at one time. And that's going to be, it seems like the argument here is like, was that material still classified at the time that he had it in his possession? Yeah. It's going to be a long and complex, unlike the others, which are just ridiculous on their face.
Yeah. But I mean, one thing we can say is you got to give props to Trump, because that's a guy who hates having classified documents, top secret shit in his house.
Well, his bathroom, it's okay.
But all kidding aside, there is some delicious yet really outrageous irony in Donald Trump indicting someone for having top secret documents in their house.
It's been said over and over again, but we have to say it again. Every accusation is an admission.
Yes.
I think what surprised people is they've been able to go faster than any other modern example of an authoritarian regime in terms of destroying everything.
Well, because he was primed. We had him once, so we knew what he was capable of. We and he knew that without guardrails, he can do the shit that he really wanted to and tried to do in his first presidency. So without a Bill Barr as the Attorney General, maybe I actually can investigate and even prosecute and perhaps even imprison my opponents. We still have a powerful media in this country, and there's been some great reporting in the last week or so in terms of the behind the scenes of what's going on, in particular at the Justice Department, how Bondi and Deputy AG Todd Blanche have been against a lot of this stuff, and how Ed Martin, the freak who couldn't get to be the U.S. attorney in D.C. because of his extremist positions, how, in effect, he's kind of running the Department of Justice, how he reports directly into Trump. But, it's stuff we really didn't know 2 weeks ago. So it's not as simple as people think. It's not like he's the king, they're his minions, and they're all like, yes, sir, enthusiastically. I think some of them are as terrified as we are, yet they have to do certain things. But we're learning that there's resistance not just out in Main Street. There's resistance on Pennsylvania Avenue. And again, that's not to discount any of the chaos and damage that we're seeing and experiencing right now.
Yes.
The last thing I want to mention is tomorrow's No Kings protests. People, really important, get out there, demonstrate, defend our democracy, defend free speech, the right to assemble. It is so important. There are websites you can go to find out where the protests are in your community, where you live. This is so important in terms of resisting. All right, let's get to the winners and losers.
My winner, Representative Kevin Kiley of California, a Republican who is showing up to work each day and criticizing his party for keeping his House out of session during the shutdown. My loser, a three-way tie. revenge prosecutions, militarization of democratic cities, abusive ICE extractions.
My winner is the rule of law in Illinois. A 3-judge panel of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, made up of a Trump, Obama, and a Bush appointee, unanimously upheld the district court injunction barring deployment of the National Guard in Illinois. My loser is U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro. Federal grand juries have declined 3 times to indict Sidney Reed on felony charges for an incident with a federal law enforcement officer. So Pirro brought misdemeanor charges, which she just lost that too.
My winner is the mainstream media, who, with the exception of OAN, state TV, handed in their Defense Department press badges this week rather than capitulate to Pete Hegseth's attempt to control how they cover the Pentagon. My loser is the U.S. State Department for revoking visas of people who made comments about Charlie Kirk's murder. Marco Rubio, shame on you. And that gets us to the weekly rant. So as I mentioned before, tomorrow, when this episode will post, it'll be Saturday, October 18th. And there will be approximately 2,500 No Kings protests taking place across the country, from the largest cities to the smallest suburban and rural communities. The purpose of these peaceful protests is as simple as their name. No Kings. Whether it was 250 years ago with a revolution against the British monarchy, or today's concerns over Donald Trump's autocratic actions, Americans don't like kings. You know what we do like? Freedom. We love our democracy. And so tomorrow's protests are about the First Amendment, free speech, the right to assemble, and they're a demonstration of unequivocal patriotism and love of country. But not so, according to leading Republicans like House Speaker Mike Johnson, who called the planned protests a, quote, hate America rally, attended by the, quote, pro-Hamas wing of the Democratic Party and the, quote, Antifa people. But comments like Johnson's aren't limited to the GOP's views on the protests alone. It's how they view perhaps more than half the country. This week, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt claimed, quote, the Democrat Party's main constituency are made up of Hamas terrorists, illegal aliens, and violent criminals. That's who the Democrat Party is catering to, not the Trump administration, and not the White House, and not the Republican Party, who is standing up for law-abiding Americans. Right. Law-abiding Americans. Tell that to the hundreds of D.C. Metro police officers like Michael Fanone and Daniel Hodges, who got the shit beaten out of them on January 6th by violent rioters who were ultimately pardoned by the convicted felon president. And to the family of Officer Brian Sicknick, who died the next day after being attacked. As always with these fascist fuckers, they are practicing levels of projection that would give Freud a huge boner. But let's be crystal clear about what's really happening here. Donald Trump's approval is in the toilet. He is underwater on his signature campaign issues of the economy and immigration, and his fascist deployment of National Guard troops to American cities is backfiring bigly. Americans are paying more for groceries. U.S. citizens are being aggressively detained in violent ICE raids. Free speech and due process are under massive attack. And Trump is weaponizing the Justice Department against his political opponents and perceived enemies with bogus investigations and frivolous indictments. That's what these protests are about. It's actually a Love America rally, little Mike. Look, Trump is a president who is elected with less than 50% of the popular vote. And while he brags that he won all 7 swing states, he won them by the thinnest margins of less than 2%. And he is appreciably less popular today than he was 9 months ago. Trump is a president with the Epstein scandal hanging over his head. It's an existential threat that has him desperately throwing distraction after distraction at the American people in an effort to bury this horrible story. And together with his party, he is terrified of what could happen if Democrats win the midterms next year. So, Trump and his sycophantic thugs can try to brand the No Kings protests and Democrats in general with as many bullshit ad hominem attacks and lies as they want. But they know the truth. They know that the resistance movement is growing. They know America is turning on them. That's why they're so desperate to change the narrative. That's why they are so desperate to rewrite history. And make no mistake, Trump would love nothing more than to see violence break out tomorrow. He would love to use that violence as another lame excuse to declare more fake national emergencies, to justify more troop deployments and ultimately invoke the Insurrection Act. Because martial law is his wet dream. Because that's how desperate he is. But tomorrow's protests will be yet another peaceful demonstration against the growing tyranny of this president and his administration. Millions and millions of Americans will be marching in solidarity as a demonstration of our commitment to our beloved democracy and our promise to never let it die. All right, let's get to Juliette Kayyem. In academia, private sector, government, and media, Professor Juliette Kayyem is an international leader in crisis management and homeland security. She serves as the faculty chair of the Homeland Security and Global Health Projects at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Previously, she served as President Obama's Assistant Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security and as Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick's Homeland Security Advisor. She is an on-air CNN Senior National Security Analyst, Pulitzer Prize finalist, and contributing writer for The Atlantic and Boston's local NPR station, GBH. She also consults for governors, mayors, public and private institutions on crisis management. She is a senior advisor to Teneo, the global consulting firm, and founded her own consulting firm to support the preparedness needs of companies, from Fortune 500 to startups. Juliette is the author or editor of 6 books, including her most recent, The Devil Never Sleeps, Learning to Live in an Age of Disasters. Juliette, welcome into the back room.
I'm so glad to be here.
So there's so much going on. I want to start with the Venezuelan boats.
Yeah.
The U.S. this week blew up the 6th boat. Apparently it's a drug boat, according to the administration. It's the 6th boat in the past month that they've blown up. 6 alleged narco-terrorists were killed, bringing the total dead so far to 27.
Yeah.
What the heck is going on here? Are we going to war with Venezuela? And if so, why?
Yeah. So I think the short answer to your question is yes. I think we have to anticipate that there'll be some sort of military effort in Venezuela by the United States. The New York Times is already reporting as of yesterday that we have covert operations going on. Okay, so what's going on? So the boats are, I think, a preliminary salvo as a message. They are more than arguably unlawful. For no one knows who they are. The White House is just making representations about who they are. We're getting reporting that there's significant concern at the Pentagon because there are rules of engagement. There are standards as regards these kinds of missions, and generally they would never be done in a situation where you had a law enforcement alternative. So even arguably, if you could say, well, we need to kill the enemy, and you could prove that it was the enemy, right? There's processes, and the first question you ask is, are there other non-lethal alternatives? There's no reason to believe that our normal maritime capacity, which is basically arrest, which we do all the time, is not working. So one has to assume that they don't have the evidence and that they're not trying for alternatives. So it's just a message. And the reporting from Latin America and Venezuela and Colombia, because we've killed some Colombians,
right?
Has been that most of these people are fishermen. Experts that I talk to who are looking at the size of the boats, where they're heading, have all confirmed that these are do not look like drug transport boats. They're either too big, there's too many people, you wouldn't have that many people on a boat, and that they are either likely, they could be immigrant boats, or they are fishing boats. In one instance, I think it's pretty clear that it was fishermen. And you're starting to get some crankiness from Congress, but you don't expect anything from them right now. So what is this all about? This is about a hemispheric play by the White House as it recedes from both the European, recedes from the European and Russian play. Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, and Donald Trump have a vision of spheres, and they would like more control of the Americosphere, and that will include taking control. I'm not sure in what ways or what the day two plan is of getting Venezuela Maduro's leadership out, maybe installing the resistance there, and then I don't know, wipe our hands clean. I guess that's their plan, and it's not. I don't want to say it's doomed for failure. Venezuela is complicated, but it is something that should be more transparent to Congress and the American public, especially from a president who is the allegedly America First president.
Yeah. You mentioned fishermen.
Yeah.
I mean, we're 9 months into this presidency, almost 10, I guess, and nothing seems to shock me anymore. But what we're talking about here is that the United States president is authorizing our military to murder innocent people.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's when you get through all the muck. That is at the bottom of it. That's, I want to say it's unbelievable, but it really isn't unbelievable with this guy.
By military lethal force. I mean, in other words, that they are governed by rules. I mean, I completely agree with you in the sort of lack of focus on these incidents. The first one got a lot of play, and now we're on number 5 or 6, as you said, mm-hmm. and as far as we know, mm-hmm. and there's almost no pushback. But that's in its clearest form, that's exactly what's happening. Is that and the fear it's engendering in not just, of course, Venezuela, but Colombia and other areas there. Is well noted in their media. I work for CNN. I do CNN domestic, but about 25 of my hits as a national security analyst for them are international. So I watch international a lot. This is getting a lot more play internationally than it is domestically.
Yeah, and you mentioned the concern within the Department of Defense, in particular in the Office of General Counsel, where there's a lot of international law experts. I mean, these war crimes that are being committed, and we know that Trump doesn't really care, and maybe Pete Hegseth is sort of drunk on Trump's coattails, but I was just following orders. We know from history has never been an acceptable defense. 3, 4, 5 years from now, when some of these people could really be held accountable for stuff.
Yeah.
At a certain point.
That's exactly right. And I think the thinking is that they won't be, right? That either because this does not end, right? That they just envision a world in which this kind of conduct is acceptable because leadership is always going to excuse it, or as we're reading, they are demanding additional what do you call it, like due diligence or protections from legal counsel that they are doing this under the belief that it is lawful, so that their defense is going to be, I did everything possible to assure that it was lawful. I don't know if that's a legitimate defense, but we do not subject ourselves. We would not authorize one of our military to be judged by the International Criminal Court. So in some ways, they're also protected. The question is who would have standing? Let's assume some future where this madness is not leading us. And it's hard to know who would have standing in a United States court to go after these sort of people lower than Hegseth. And Hegseth's more than happy to do it because he doesn't really have a philosophy of governing except masculinity. I mean, that's basically his philosophy, and no one knows what that means except for this, I guess.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned before, quote unquote, covert CIA ops. These operations, by the very virtue of being called covert operations, are supposed to be done in secret. Yet Trump yesterday is out there just like telegraphing everything, which is astounding. Yeah. Right? How unprecedented and more so dangerous is that? Everything the CIA does is in secret.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and part of it is, of course, the New York Times got it. You don't know how they got it and whether the White House actually wanted them to get it. So I sometimes think that there might be, because Trump likes, if this is part of a strategy to sort of terrify Venezuela, uh, uh, making them think that there are covert operations would be part of that. But I've never heard of a president confirming covert operations. But that always, that's because we always assume serious presidents. That's not what's happening here. This is for show. It is for show in Venezuela. It is to align with the Nobel Peace Prize winner, who is the Venezuelan resistance, leads the Venezuelan resistance there. But it's also a statement to Mexico, Colombia, other countries there that we worry about in terms of drug cartels, is that this White House is going to use lethal military force. And they want this to be public, that this is part of an overall campaign to assert greater control in the Americas. That's what they want to do in the Americas.
I have this theory that the Epstein scandal is the biggest existential threat to Trump, that it could be the biggest scandal in presidential history. And a lot of people feel the same way. And judging by his actions and the actions of Congress and his sycophantic supporters, it seems like they see it that way too. And we've been hearing all about, the distractions, one distraction after another. Is it possible in Venezuela is just another distraction? Look, we're sitting here talking about bombing drug boats, and we're not talking about Epstein.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think I used to think the Epstein thing as a national security person who likes to not get distracted by everything Trump does, like the craziness and like whatever. I sort of, we've all, people who have platforms like you or me, or like, I honestly just try to stick to my lane. Like I have lots of opinions about lots of things. And so the Epstein thing was always like that thing, right? Like it sort of didn't. But for someone like me, I just couldn't stop ignoring it because, or I had to stop ignoring it because when I think about sort of what's animating a lot of the activities that's destabilizing our homeland, destabilizing military-civil relations, and destabilizing, in this case, the Americas, was what is this all about? I don't know if it's Epstein, honestly. I mean, it does seem like we're trying to avoid this issue, or he's trying to avoid this issue. He's the Speaker of the House, Johnson, is not sitting the sort of final vote of the new Congresswoman from Arizona, and so so it's hard to ignore at this stage. What I do know is, if I'm a foreign intelligence agency, ally or enemy, two things that I'm monitoring right now to assess America's vulnerabilities is Epstein and what Trump would be willing to do to distract from whatever might be in those files. And I note to your listeners, it's notable that A.G. Bondi did not perjure herself when asked a direct question about whether there were pictures of Donald Trump with young girls. And then so went on the attack. To me, that was a sign that she did not want to perjure herself, rather than that she just went on the attack. So one is Epstein. The other is, of course, Trump's mental capacity. That to me is it's not speculation. It's not, they did it to Biden, so we can do it to Trump. It is if I am a rational intelligence agency, let's just say France, right? We don't even have to say Russia, right? Like, let's just say you're France. And you're looking at the conduct, you're watching the press conferences, you're seeing the social media posts. This is not a president whose capacities are reliable, and that therefore makes you treat us, an ally, differently.
And putting aside Trump's motivations, whatever they may be, What are the long-term consequences of these strikes in Venezuela from a national security / intelligence standpoint?
Well, I mean, right now, the long-term consequences is that it's shifted. I mean, it's shifted our the rules of engagement in the hemisphere, where any country might be susceptible, or their citizens might be killed without due process, without notification, without the ability to be captured, right? I mean, if you gave them the option, they would probably all say, arrest us and prove your case. And so that will be destabilizing on economic, social, personal realms throughout the Americas. Like I literally sometimes think like, if you're Venezuelan, do you go fishing anymore, right? And then that's going to have economic and consequences and humanitarian consequences. So that rules of engagement has changed, and it makes us more vulnerable for a change in the rules of engagement by them. And so you are hearing stories about the Mexican cartels maybe beginning to target ICE agents. I don't know if those are true, but that would be what I would expect from the change that we engender. But I think the second is people already forget because it seems like a lifetime ago. But the president came in talking about taking over the Panama Canal. He's now talking about and likely to try to change regime change in Venezuela. That America's adventures in South and Central America will begin anew. We had, you and I know because of our age, but people forget that places like El Salvador and Nicaragua and Haiti were intimately tied to America's national security agenda in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and we really did withdraw from that. It was wildly unsuccessful, and instead tried to support democratic reform in all those countries, and that we seem to have given up on. Look, they want a sphere of influence. They're not going to get any in Europe now because of Russia. They're going to have a sphere of influence, we think, in the Middle East, but that will be monetary and real estate related and not otherwise. They're ceding Asia to China. That is clear. They're ceding the world to China on a variety of things, but they want to own something, and it's going to be the Americas.
It's funny you mentioned the Panama Canal.
Yeah, we forget.
Trump, his flood the zone strategy.
Yeah.
There's so much that comes at us that we do forget. And it's only been 9 months, but there's no more talk about Panama Canal. There's no more talk about Greenland. Yeah. There's no more talk about annexing Canada. Like all of these things, it does speak to Trump's lack of any real core philosophies or foreign policy agenda. But it also speaks to the pathological nature of his performative needs and his toddler-like attention span. And it makes you then question, like, okay, Venezuela, they're talking about land strikes, they're talking about this, that, all the things we're talking about. But at the end of the day, like 2 months from now, are we going to be like, oh, we're not even talking, nobody talks about Venezuela anymore because the bombings, it's that same, like you mentioned, the masculinity thing with Hegseth. With Trump, is all about projecting his strength, that he's the tough guy, the strong man like Kim and Putin and Orban and all the guys he worships. And he doesn't want to go to war. He doesn't really want to go to war. I think that would be a disaster for him because he ran on ending wars.
I know, but his people will follow him anywhere. I mean, it is, he hopes to put the Democrats in the, pro, the sort of, anti-peace. He's going to. Let me go back. I think Venezuela is different than Canada or Greenland or Panama. And the reason why is I'm looking where the Navy is right now. Something like 30 to 35% of our Navy, of our active Navy ships, the ones that are available, are near Venezuela. I mean, you do not deploy those kinds of resources unless you have a plan for them.
Or unless you're just a sociopath.
That could be it. That could be it.
You know what I mean?
I think he will view this as an easy lift. That he's got the politics aligned. He's going to get the resistance, the democratic movement in Venezuela. He can present this as pro-democracy, and no one's going to cry over a leadership change in Venezuela. No one in South America. I mean, they'll be nervous about it, but so I do think this one might be different, just because the combination of he can create a narrative and the deployment of resources, which you never saw in Panama, you never saw obviously with Canada. But I think, and I think his people will follow him. I mean, the best line I ever heard about Trump in terms of his national security policy, if you can call it that, is to Trump, there's no yesterday and there's no tomorrow, right? It is transactional, and it is
5 seconds in front of him.
Right, and it's self-glorifying. Like it is. There's what do I benefit today? So he signs a peace deal in quotes, which was essentially the delayed Biden peace deal, because Netanyahu didn't want Biden to get any credit and allowed this horror to continue for months. He signs a peace deal. It's already, from all accounts, semi falling apart,
Right.
because there was actually
Shocker.
no agreement on day 2 about what day 2 would look like, and it does seem like there's a element of the agreement, or at least a side agreement, that will be the ownership of Gaza for commercial purposes, and one has to assume that the Trump family will benefit from this. And you're hearing members of Netanyahu's cabinet basically say, basically requote Hitler, who famously and horrifyingly said, there's no good Jew. Like, in other words, any Jew is a bad Jew. And
Right.
they basically say that about the Palestinians. Well, we know how that ended. But he doesn't care. Trump, it's like the day after is sort of inconsequential. He got the big moment in Israel. He got all the media to follow on. He got the gratitude from the Israelis for getting the hostages released, thank God. But nothing about, wow, we have what about the Palestinians? And what about long-term security for Israel?
Well, that's my point about Venezuela, is that, with him, it is all optics. It's all performance. It's, the same thing from 2003, George Bush, mission accomplished. And then we were at war for 20 years. At least those guys were committed to their ideology. They were committed to that war. Trump, he has no plan for peace in the Middle East, yet he's declaring the war is over. It's number 8. It's number 8 now on his list. That's what he cares about, having a little chart that he can Truth Social about. But it's the same thing about Venezuela.
To the Peace Committee for the Nobel Prize. It's so pathetic, yes.
Well, but speaking of that, he's his own worst enemy. He goes to the Middle East, right? At least then, which is only 5 days ago or whatever, it looked like this situation was much better than the one you're describing today, because you're correct. It looks like that ceasefire is very fragile and likely going to collapse, like all of the other ceasefires. But he goes over there. All he needed to do was say, this is a great day. It's a solemn day, but the hostages are home. We're working on peace. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody. Yeah. Instead, it's Obama was awful, Biden is awful, blah, 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 the same rally speech.
Yeah.
And if you're the Nobel Committee, you're like, well, even if we wanted to, he just blew it again. Yeah. But with Venezuela, to me, it's like the same thing. He doesn't want to put in the work. There's no core strategy about going to war.
We'll talk again in 3 weeks and see, because I
Maybe
agree
you're right.
with you. I agree with you on everything, but he doesn't think it's work. Like, in other words, he'll just, look what we did in Iran. Like, he'll just drop a few bombs. He'll, hopefully, he'll make a message, whatever. None of this is work to him, right? Because there's no tomorrow, right? Why worry about the consequences when there's no tomorrow?
I want to ask you about something you said about his supporters. You're right. 10 years ago, he said, I can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, not lose any support. He was sort of right, because for the most part, he's not lost support. But given the way the elections are won and lost these days on the margins, we don't need all of MAGA to turn on him.
No, that's right.
5% is a gift if that happens.
Right.
We see that they've turned on him on some appreciable level with Epstein. They didn't like the Iran bombing. He promised them no wars. He's not lowered groceries. He's not delivering on and they don't care about Venezuela. You think MAGA cares about Venezuela? So I do think there's some cracks in the armor. And I do think, but maybe you're right, but I think Venezuela could backfire on him. With Trump, it's every dot connects. You're killing innocent people in Venezuela. You're also arresting citizens on the streets of Chicago.
That's where I think the connection is. And I also think like the bailout of, oh my God, what country now are we bailing out for $20 billion?
Argentina.
Argentina.
Right, that's the other thing. Like, they're pissed off at him about that.
Yeah, I do think that there's a consistency, but I do, like, all of that, I don't think it's background noise, but I do think about, you know, that with what is happening in the homeland is a very difficult and unsuccessful story for Trump to take. What I tell people, you know, because I got my girlfriends, you know, calling me all the time thinking, you know, should I move to Canada, whatever. And I say, you know, just wake up every morning and remind yourself how wildly unpopular he is and each of these policies are. And I think that's why, you know, we're talking before the a few days before the No Kings rally. But I think, you know, I think one of the reasons why you're seeing the Republicans come on like crazy people about it is because they suspect what a lot of people know. Lots of Americans are going to come out. So we're going to call them pro-Hamas, you know, pro-Soros, you know, ralliers. And I think, and then there'll probably be, you know, some deployment of the military in time for like we don't know what he's going to do in the next 48 hours. They'd be smarter to sort of ignore it. They're sort of elevating people's interest in it in some ways. But I do think this idea of what's happening in the homeland economically because of the tariffs, we're in a shutdown. Like we forget to mention that. Like lots of people are working and not getting paid, and lots of services are being denied. People and this immigration stuff. The immigration stuff is really interesting because it, I mean, it's horrifying. It shows that Secretary Noem, head of DHS, has no control over ICE. It's all being run out of the White House, and they lie about what's going on. They're holding, there's too many incidences of them holding Americans who do not look like the Americans they think that Americans should look like. To say that there's any real strategy here. And Americans really don't like it because what they were promised was, you know, deportations of the worst of the worst. And they should have focused on people with final deportation orders who are still in the country, either in jail or out of jail, and get them the heck out. I would have supported that. I'm a Democrat. I believe in strong borders. I believe in rules about who gets to be here. I don't believe someone who is a mother of three and is normalizing her immigration status, and that's been approved by a court, and gets held after she leaves is either is who we were talking about, nor does it satisfy like any semblance of what the heck are we doing here. But they want, once again, it's for the show. They like the pictures. They're glossy pictures.
Well, none of what Trump says makes sense. He contradicts himself every time he opens his mouth. If he's talking about Venezuela, it's because there's an influx of, you know, they opened the prisons and they're all coming in with the fentanyl.
Yeah.
2 days ago, he might have said, oh, there's nobody coming over the border. We haven't had anybody over the border. One guy in the last 4 months. Well, how does that, and then, so he goes from one thing to the next. Yeah. Then he goes to court and says, we're being invaded. That's why I need all these emergency powers. So it's like, which is it? Are they coming over the border? Is there an invasion? Or are you bragging that we haven't had anybody cross in months?
Yeah, and those inconsistencies are hurting him. I mean, in the sense of they do hurt him in court because courts are now willing to take that, you know, what he posts as a presidential statement about intent and then saying, wait, lawyer, you're telling me the opposite, but what the president tweeted out 5 minutes ago. And so, you know, I mean, you know, but this is the madness that the lack of certainty and, you know, or the lack of stability that they enjoy. I'm on the outside and I find it freaking exhausting. Every once in a while I have to tune out for a few days. I was like, Like, how can anyone in the administration be enjoying this? Is not fun. I mean, by let alone the policies around it. It is a mad way to govern a large society, a large country. But if their goal is to, basically exhaust people, that they may be succeeding, but that exhaustion may turn against them. I mean, people may remember, people like not being political all the time. It is, and we have to remember that. I think where the Democrats failed is, one is they failed on immigration, and they should forever, or we should. I'm a Democrat. We need to think about what our immigration policy is. I am a moderate Democrat. I am pro the Democratic Party, but I do think elements within the party, when you push them, really are open border. I don't think that's they'll say they aren't, but then they, you try to do anything and they call Obama the deporter in chief. Like, this is not immigration policy. So we lost on immigration, but we also lost on reminding people why government matters. They're seeing it now. The farmers are seeing it now. The mothers who are trying to buy food for their kids are seeing it now. School teachers are seeing it now. Doctors are seeing it now. And even the venture and money people in San Francisco seem to be seeing it now. And we just have to remind people government does matter in their lives, if only to give them consistency so that they can live their lives as they want to. So you can't, if you're a small business, you can't plan what your prices will be right now. And if you're a multi-gazillionaire, you cannot plan what your supply chain looks like right now. And if you're an athlete, you have no idea what to expect with FIFA. Every day there's just and maybe that's the messaging is, government exists so that you don't have to think about it, and everyone's thinking about it now.
Well, you're right. The clarity in that messaging it's been bankrupt.
Yeah.
Last week I interviewed Kate Conley. She's running against Mike Lawler. She's running to unseat Mike Lawler.
Right.
It's a big Democratic primary in New York, 17th district. But I think she's got a real good shot. She's got an incredible, impressive background, combat vet, national security person. And I said to her, when you go into like a cafe or, whatever, and like some Republican person is like, yeah, what are you going to do about those trans men in the bathrooms, right? Every Democrat should just say, okay, you have a wife, you have a mother, you have daughters, you have nieces. When is the last time any of them ever said to you, they just saw a man in the bathroom?
Yeah.
But when is the last time you went into a supermarket and you couldn't afford all the groceries you wanted to buy? Yeah. Focus on what's important. Yeah. And to your point, that's the message that Democrats have not been great at.
They let the Republicans define it. The line, I could not believe Harris didn't use it, but the line that should have been used is, there are more women who legitimately have accused Donald Trump of rape or sexual misconduct than there are trans athletes seeking entry into the NCAA. Like, let's talk about what really matters. And then you just dismiss it, right? But instead we get into equality. We're letting we're letting them define what America is, and that's just wrong. And I do think on issues around sports, right, we need to also listen, right? I'm not saying I want to deny them. It's just there are lots of people in the Democratic Party who we should listen to about how do you align these competing interests, rather than saying, well, you're anti-trans, or even worse, you're anti-LGBTQ, and say, because these are people who, if given the chance, are going to revisit gay marriage, right? This is, if given the chance, I have no doubt about it. So it is, but so we have a lot to learn. Our challenge is, of course, you can't fight somebody with nobody. And unfortunately, we have a lot of nobodies at the top. And it's hilarious because I'm a very cautious person. I'm a, as I said, I'm a moderate Democrat. I piss off my kids all the time with my various opinions about things, and who are much more progressive than me. And I am in their camp now. That what we're facing as a nation can't be. We're going back. It has got to be. We have got to ram through this with as much righteous anger as anyone who loves America believes in, and that includes what our homeland looks like. I mean, we are seeing a resistance in Chicago in particular to a breakdown in a constitutional and legal norm that we have had forever. And the president keeps threatening an insurrection act. I don't know if he'll do it because the law is pretty not iffy in that regard. But he has changed the dynamic, and we're starting to. It's not just resistance from the streets of Chicago. I mean, you're hearing it from Republican governors as well. I mean, we've got to amplify those voices to say just how not normal all of this is.
Well, I think you're right about what you said before, and this has been happening for a while, and perhaps even throughout his whole presidency, but it's certainly gotten worse recently. And he is an incredibly unpopular and unsuccessful president. But there's two people I want to ask your opinion on, because they relate to everything we've been talking about in terms of messaging. The first one is Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's been very interesting of late.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other is Zohran Mamdani.
Yeah.
Now, you take those two people, both sides of the aisle, both populists, both radical, right, in their own positions or whatever, but they're kind of talking the same thing, which is freaking me out in a good way. And is there something to be learned from that? Number one is Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a really astute politician, perhaps one of the most, if not the most powerful MAGA Republican in Washington. Zohran Mamdani, 33, almost 34-year-old Muslim kid who's going to be mayor of New York City, most likely.
Going to be mayor, yeah.
Well, what are they saying that we should be paying attention to? Is she smart? Is she seeing the handwriting on the wall with Trump? And is he the future of the Democratic Party in terms of being able to connect with people on the issues that matter most? I'm a moderate Democrat, too. I don't agree with a lot of his policies, but there's something there that I think is changing the paradigm here.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I will say, like, I had the same thing where, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe Cuomo is going to be mayor of New York. And like, 8 months ago, and my kids are like, have you heard of this Mamdani guy? I'm like, no, come on. There's no way a Muslim guy who's like a social, Democrat or Democratic socialist. And here we are. So listen to you. I think he's the future of the Democratic Party in New York.
I agree. I'm starting to agree with you.
Yeah, and I think his policies are. I think the excitement level, the idea that Democrats are worried about it is ridiculous. And you look at the breakdown. It's like Jewish New Yorkers are supporting him in vast majorities in certain age brackets. Like, this is a guy who's unifying people, and the Democrat, young, and this is someone who's unifying lots and lots of disparate groups rather than the sort of, mail it in, we're going to pick Cuomo. So he is the future of the Democratic Party in terms of the we don't have to mail it in anymore. Like, we can get excitement. He is, his policies are maybe the future for New York, but I think his discussion about affordability is really resonating. And I think that's what Marjorie Taylor Greene is also picking up on. She is, she is calling them out because she's hearing from her constituents. She's also big on on releasing the Epstein files, but she is calling them out in a way that I think is super, super important about affordability. And I do think this idea of affordability is a through line that can connect many Americans to the extent that the protect democracy through line did not seem to galvanize them in the last presidential campaign. It may have been that our spokesperson wasn't right. It may have been Biden waited too long, whatever. But that didn't have resonance, but people do understand affordability being tied to government. right? The government actually has a big say on how we live our lives and rent control and and when we go to the market and tariffs and can I furnish my new home? My husband and are not for want, right? We look at the economy and go, do we really need that for the house right now? Like, and you think about us not putting a couple thousand into the market and the trickle down effects. Okay, so we didn't hire 2 guys to fix our gate because we think it can survive another winter. Like, like it probably won't, by the way, right? So just think about that trickle effect all the way down. Well, that's happening at levels that are living much more paycheck to paycheck than we are as a family. And I'm thinking, and when we decided, like, it wasn't like we could afford it. It was just like, really, like the whole thing could fall apart, right? Like we don't know, it's just like, I just think about, like, on every level, I have girlfriends who are like, well, we're not sure we're going to do that big trip this winter. People, the affordability thing, I think, does have resonance and goes to our stability, right? As a nation.
Yeah, well, when you think
Goes
about
to
all
our
the
security.
programs that have been cut and all the hardship, the chaos, the cruelty of Doge earlier this year, the suffering that our farmers, and that's why when they see $40 billion now going to Argentina, I think there's something
For only
that's
one candidate,
with the
though.
start of something.
Right. I think that's right. No, I hope so. And we'll see, what the streets look like in a couple days, right? Like, I think that is, but show up. Like, and we all show up in our different ways.
People have to show up.
Show up, and as it's there's a lot of noise, but I think it's why do I do podcasts? It's like you got to get out there and remind people that they have agency. And this goes a lot to my expertise, which is, security and crisis and stuff, which is, one of the most successful ways to think about sort of disaster or crisis management, which we may very well be in right now, is you got to give people agency. And so I don't appreciate, like, you're probably a news junkie like me. You see these people on TV and it's like, we're in an autocracy and everything is horrible, whatever. It's like, I want something, right? Like and everyone can do that on different levels, right? Which is also
absolutely. People have the power. They can't forget that.
They do. So this has been a pleasure.
Yes, thanks for coming on, and
thank you.
Come back.
As I putz with my hair throughout the whole thing. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise. Take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Maddie Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Lengale. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.